about creative leadership in the 21st century. Leadership is a heavily researched topic, and as someone who has studied leadership extensively, I can tell you that there is no agreement amongst the scholars as to what the definition of leadership is. One of the theories that has emerged is great man theory. This was one of the first theories that came about in about 1840, and the idea behind this theory was that great leaders were born and not made. So if you happen to be born the son of a king or into an aristocratic family, then you have the opportunity to lead an army and to become a great man. If you happen to be born a peasant, into middle class, or a woman, certainly that opportunity wouldn't have been available to you. Another theory that emerged is trait theory. And trait theory believes that you have the possession of certain characteristics. And we can probably agree that there are some characteristics we like our leaders to have. Intelligence, humility, integrity, confidence, those make sense to us. Other traits that don't make sense to us include things like height and good looks. So if you are a taller person, you have more opportunities to be a leader than a shorter person. There were some studies done out of the University of Florida and the University of North Carolina, and what they found was that for every inch of height above average, an average for men is 5'9", and average for women is 5'3", you would earn about $800 a year more. So over the course of your career, that adds up to about $180,000. The other theory of leadership is situational theory. And situational theory believes that there are many kinds of leaders, and you have to align the type of leader with the type of situation in order to have the best fit. So what I propose is that we can take these three theories, and believe me, there are many, many hundreds of theories. This is only the tip of the iceberg. And we can say that great women possess the traits necessary to lead the world through the situations found in the 21st century. Yes. So, this is an emotional kind of statement, and some of you don't necessarily believe that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some evidence to show you why, in fact, that is true. So the first thing we need to know is whether or not there are enough women to be able to do this. So Stats Canada just released its population statistics for 2011. The Canadian population around 35 million people, and as you can see, there are slightly more women than there are men. So we know that there are enough women to be able to do this. The other thing we would ask is, are these women capable? So if we look at education and the number of university graduates, the top line, the red line, is the number of women graduates, and the bottom line is the number of blue male graduates. So over time, what we're seeing is that there are more women graduating, and as we get moving to the future, that curve becomes steeper, and it will only be accelerated. So we've got the women, they're educated, certainly they must be working in senior leadership positions. This is a study that looked at the state of the world's female chief executive officers and companies. So the first box identifies globally where we're at, so 2.4% of global 500 companies, so the 500 wealthiest companies in the world or biggest companies in the world, have 12 women at the helm. In the United States, it's a little bit better. The Fortune 500 companies are 16 women at the helm. In Canada, which is the bottom visual, it's better still, and there are 30 companies of the 500 that have women chief executive officers. What's really interesting about this is that there's actually only 26 women, because one woman runs 4 of those companies, and another woman runs 2. So, I know, it's amazing, isn't it? But women aren't there, so that's okay. So these educated, available women are not running the companies. Certainly then they must be sitting on the boards. So if we look at senior level boards, this study comes out of Europe. What we see is that the representation of women is about 11%. Now, an average board size is around 9, so that means that there's 1 woman on these boards. Evidence shows that if there's only 1 woman, that woman doesn't have a voice. She doesn't get heard. So it's not enough just to have women. You have to have them in adequate numbers. So this is European, as I said, so maybe we do a little bit in North America. This comes from the Fortune 500 companies. We do a little bit better. It shows about 15%. Canada is within 1% of that. So we've almost got 2 women represented on executive boards. What the evidence shows about that is when you have 2 women, people get confused, imagine. And they start to not be clear about which woman is which. And they have been known to ascribe ideas that one woman has to the other woman because they don't know which one is which. So really, the tipping point is 3 women. It has been shown that when you have 3 women on a board, then you start to have different conversations. You start to solve problems differently. You start to have a different perspective on issues. So we know that women aren't on boards, they aren't running companies, so certainly then they must be in politics. This table comes from information that's produced by the United Nations. It looks at global representation of women in Parliament, so it would be compared to our federal parliamentary system. And this is the top 10 countries. Now there's some countries on this list that you would expect to see, Sweden, Finland, Norway, those kinds of countries. There's probably some countries up there that you wouldn't expect to see. I mean, how many of you would have predicted the #1 spot there? But what you don't see in the top 10 is you don't see Canada. So where is Canada? I know you're all curious. Canada is 44th on the list. Imagine if you're an American, you're 95th on the list. Now the reason that I put the Republic of Macedonia up there is because just like having 3 women on a board, there's a tipping point in political representation as well. And that tipping point is 30%. So the 24th position is the position of the tipping point. So Canada is 20 countries behind that. So we have a lot of work to do there. So perhaps the reason that these women aren't there is because they don't bring any value. Well, if we look at what happens with companies that have a high representation of women, which is represented by the blue box, and companies that have the lowest representation of women in senior leadership positions, what we find is that the return on equity is 41% greater for those companies that have significant amounts of women than companies that have significantly less numbers of women. The other thing is that earnings before interest and taxes, which is another common way that we would measure productivity and success, for those companies that have the highest percentages of women is 56% greater. Now again, this is a European statistic, so how does North America wash out in that? Not quite as significant, but still it's 35% better. Now if you could find me any investment today that pays 35%, I would be all over that. So this begs the question of whether or not people actually believe this. Like, do you believe me? And I know you don't believe me because the research tells me that you don't believe me. So this statistic, or this bar graph up here, shows that when you ask people whether or not they believe that having a significant number of women in senior leadership or on executive boards contributes to the financial success of that business, 90% of women who are at that senior level would say, well, of course, because they're doing it. Only 62% of the men would say that. But what is most disconcerting is that at a middle management level, 50% of men don't believe it. And if you think about that, it makes it very difficult because in order to get to those senior levels, those women are going to have to somehow barge through those men. So maybe it's not about the money. Maybe it's about work behaviors. Well, if we look at work behaviors that are needed to improve organizational performance, in the middle of this slide, there's 9 behaviors listed there. And the boxes on the far left indicate which behaviors are applied more by women, are applied slightly more by women, which are applied equally by men and women, and then the box on the bottom indicates which behaviors are applied more by men. If we reorganize this list and we look at the top 4 behaviors that are the most important behaviors in order for companies to be successful and who demonstrates them, we see that 3 out of 4 of those behaviors are demonstrated by women. Now, why isn't this happening? The bar graph on the far right-hand side is also really disconcerting because what it shows is that even though we've identified these are really important behaviors, they're not being demonstrated. So why is that? Well, one reason is because women aren't there to do it. Now, I know some of you doubting Thomases and non-believers are thinking, well, it's because women choose to be at home. Yeah. That's not true, okay? So if we look at the reasons why women decide and men decide not to go into senior leadership positions, what we see is that the most important part of that decision has to do with their work environment. And in fact, men and women are both quite comparable when family circumstances is the reason why. But certainly that reason is much lower than work environment. So as we move forward, the types of leader behaviors that are viewed as being most important in this crisis that we're in right now, and the types of behaviors that we need to go forward are identified. So again, this list has been reorganized. The blue bars in the first two columns indicate the behaviors that are seen as most important now and into the future. And the bar on the far right indicates which behaviors are most often applied. However, we remain hopeful because now you all know this and you're all well informed, and so now you're going to go out and change your workplaces. No, you're not. In a survey, once people are presented with the evidence and asked, has the strategic importance of gender diversity become a priority for your company? Is it a top 3 goal? Is it a top 10 goal? 71 and 72% of people said, no, it's not. There has been no change. So companies will not have better work environments and they will not be more profitable. So in conclusion, I would like to solve this problem. And so I have decided that the only way that's going to happen is if men get on board. Because men have to, first of all, come to admit the truth, to understand the truth, to recognize the value of women, to embrace the benefits, and to actively seek the participation of women in senior leadership positions, on boards, and in politics, because that is where the differences will be made. Thank you.